The deafening crack of a rifle shot split the quiet morning air, sending a flock of startled birds into flight as Xander Quinn reined in his stallion at the edge of Wolf Creek, Colorado. His weathered face hardened as he spotted the commotion, a woman surrounded by an angry mob, their faces twisted with fear and hatred. It was June 1878, and the West had little patience for those it didn't understand. "Witch," someone shouted as others grabbed for stones. "Devil woman." Xander had seen plenty in his 30 years: the Civil War, gold rushes, and the endless struggle of frontier life, but the raw terror on the woman's face cut through his usual detachment. Dust swirled around her torn dress as she backed toward the ravine edge, her dark hair whipping in the wind. In that moment, he made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. "That's enough." Xander's voice boomed across the clearing as he urged his horse forward, hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. The crowd parted reluctantly, muttering as he positioned himself between them and the woman. "This ain't your business, Quinn," growled Frank Miller, the town's self-appointed moral guardian. "She brought the fever that took my sister's boy." "And my crops failed after she passed my field," another voice called out. Xander surveyed the 24 townsfolk, noting the mixture of fear and righteous indignation on their faces. "Last I checked, Miller, we still had law in these parts. If you've got charges, take them to Sheriff Hayes." "We don't need the sheriff to handle a curse," Miller spat on the ground. "Everyone knows she's unnatural. Daughter of that foreign doctor who kept to himself. Always gathering plants, whispering to animals. Martha saw her standing in the cemetery at midnight, talking to nothing but air." Xander glanced back at the woman, whose emerald eyes met his with a fierce dignity despite her obvious fear. There was something in that gaze: intelligence, defiance, and a profound weariness that spoke of long suffering. "I'm taking her to the sheriff," Xander announced, extending his hand toward her. "He can sort this out." "She'll bewitch you too," someone warned. The woman hesitated, then reached for his outstretched hand. Her fingers were cold but steady as he pulled her onto his horse. "You're making a mistake, Quinn," Miller called as Xander turned his horse around. "Mark my words, that woman's cursed. She'll bring nothing but misfortune to anyone who helps her." Xander tipped his hat, a gesture of dismissal rather than respect. "I'll take my chances." As they rode away, he could feel her trembling against his back, though whether from fear or the morning chill he couldn't tell. "What's your name?" he asked. "Dahlia," she answered softly. "Dahlia Donovan." "Well, Dahlia Donovan, I'm Xander Quinn. I've got a cabin about 3 miles north of here. We're not going to the sheriff. That would just delay the inevitable. Those folks need time to cool down." "Why?" Her voice was barely audible over the rhythmic hoofbeats. "Why would you help me?" Xander considered the question as they rode beneath the towering pines. "Let's just say I've seen enough innocent people suffer at the hands of fear." What he didn't say was that he recognized the loneliness in her eyes, the same isolation he'd carried since returning from war to find his family gone and his place in the world uncertain. "They're right about one thing," she said after a long silence. "Trouble does seem to follow me." "Trouble follows everyone out here," Xander replied. "It's the West. Question is whether it's of your making or just bad luck. Which do you believe? I'll make that judgment myself in time." As they crested a ridge, Xander's cabin came into view, a sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled against a granite outcropping. A small corral held 3 horses, and a thin wisp of smoke still rose from the chimney. "It isn't much," he said as they dismounted, "but it's secure." Dahlia stood uncertainly, taking in the isolated homestead. "I can't stay. They'll come looking eventually." "Let them." Xander led his horse to the water trough. "I've held this land against worse than Frank Miller and his superstitious friends." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while shelves of books lined another, unusual for a frontier dwelling. A curtained alcove in the corner presumably served as a sleeping area. "You can take the bed," Xander said, adding wood to the embers in the fireplace. "I'll sleep out here." Dahlia remained by the door as if ready to flee. "You don't understand the risk. People who help me, they suffer for it." Xander straightened, studying her with patient gray eyes. I've survived Shiloh, Apache raids, and 2 Colorado winters. I'll take my chances with whatever curse you think you carry." He gestured toward a basin of water. "Get cleaned up. There's food in the pantry, then you can tell me what really happened in town." Later, as darkness settled over the mountains, they sat across from each other at Xander's rough-hewn table. Dahlia had washed the dirt from her face and bound her injuries, a cut on her arm and bruising on her wrists where someone had grabbed her. "My father was a doctor," she began, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden surface. "He came here from Boston after my mother died. He studied medicine at Harvard but was also interested in traditional remedies. The local tribes taught him about plants' healing methods. He taught me everything he knew." She looked up, meeting Xander's gaze directly. "After he died last winter, I continued his practice. Some people were grateful, others suspicious. When things went wrong, as they sometimes do even with the best care, there were whispers. Then the fever came through in April. The one that took several children," Xander noted. Dahlia nodded. "I tried to help, but my remedies couldn't save them all. One night, Martha Miller found me gathering night-blooming herbs in the cemetery. They grow better there, undisturbed. She spread word I was communing with evil spirits." Her voice faltered. "Yesterday, Frank's nephew died despite my attempts to break his fever. That was the final proof they needed." Xander considered her story, finding nothing in her manner that suggested deceit. "And the crops. The livestock that supposedly died after you passed, bad soil in the north fields, always has been. And the Petersons' cow had red water fever, visible to anyone who knows what to look for. But easier to blame a woman alone than accept the harshness of frontier life," Xander concluded. "People fear what they don't understand," Dahlia said softly. "My father warned me, but I couldn't just stop helping." As she spoke, Xander noticed the calluses on her hands, the marks of someone who worked hard, not the soft hands of a woman who relied on others or supernatural forces. Her knowledge seemed extensive, her reasoning sound. "You're welcome to stay until we figure something out," he said finally. "I make monthly trips to Denver for supplies. We could arrange passage for you elsewhere if needed." Dahlia's expression clouded. "I have nowhere to go. This was my father's home and now mine. Everything I know is here." "Then we'll find another solution," Xander said simply, though what that might be, he couldn't yet imagine. That night, as Dahlia slept in his bed and Xander made do with blankets near the fire, he found himself turning over her predicament. There was something compelling about her, a quiet strength beneath the vulnerability. In the morning, he would need to ride into town, assess the situation, perhaps speak with Sheriff Hayes. But for tonight, at least, she was safe. He didn't yet know that giving shelter to Dahlia Donovan would test not only his courage and determination, but also the barriers he'd built around his heart since returning from war. Dawn arrived with a gentle misting rain that beaded on the cabin windows. Xander woke to find Dahlia already up, tending the fire with practiced hands. The smell of coffee filled the small space. "You didn't have to do that," he said, rolling to his feet. She offered a tentative smile. "I'm not used to being idle or being a guest." "Fair enough." He accepted the cup she offered. "I need to ride into town this morning. You'll be safe here, but keep the rifle close." He nodded toward the Winchester mounted above the door. "You know how to use it. My father taught me. Said a woman alone should know how to protect herself." Smart man. Xander pulled on his boots. "I won't be long. Just need to take the measure of things, see how the wind's blowing." Dahlia's expression darkened. "They'll try to turn you against me. They'll say I've ensorcelled you." "Let them talk." Xander buckled on his gun belt with practiced ease. "I've never much cared for others' opinions." In town, Wolf Creek was carrying on with its usual morning routine. The general store was open, miners and ranchers moving about their business. At the sheriff's office, Hayes was cleaning his shotgun when Xander entered. "Quinn." The lawman nodded without looking up. "Heard you caused quite a stir yesterday. Seemed like preventing a lynching was the Christian thing to do." Hayes sighed, setting down his cleaning rag. "That Donovan woman's been trouble since her father passed. Nothing I can legally hold her on, but folks are riled up something fierce. Because she tried to help sick children with medicine instead of prayer. You know how it is in small towns." Hayes leaned back in his chair. Folk need someone to blame when things go wrong. Pretty woman living alone, mixing strange brews, keeping to herself makes an easy target. Doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. Hayes studied him. Where is she now? Safe. The sheriff nodded slowly. Best she stay that way for a while. Miller's boy is being buried today. Emotions will be running high. Xander moved toward the door. Any law against her returning to her father's place when things cool down? No law, but I can't guarantee her safety if she does. Hayes hesitated. Quinn, I've known you since you came back from the war. You're a good man, but you can't save everyone. Some situations don't have clean solutions. I'm not trying to save everyone, Xander replied. Just one person who deserves better than being run out of her home on superstition. At the general store, the reception was cooler. Conversations paused when he entered, resuming in hushed tones. Martha Miller, Frank's sister-in-law and the town's most prolific gossip, deliberately turned her back. Morning, Quinn, called Samuel Porter, the store owner, with forced joviality. What can I get you? Xander placed his regular order: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition, and added extra supplies that Dahlia might need. As Porter gathered the items, Reverend Caldwell approached. A word, Mr. Quinn. The minister's tone was grave. Xander nodded, following him to a quieter corner. I understand you've taken in the Donovan woman, Caldwell began. News travels fast. It's a small town, and people are concerned. About my immortal soul, Xander's voice held a hint of amusement. The minister didn't smile. Miss Donovan's practices concern me. Her father was a learned man, but delved into matters best left alone. The mixing of Christian medicine with pagan rituals. Healing is healing, Reverend. Results speak for themselves. And when the results are dead children, Xander's expression hardened. Those children died of fever, not from Dahlia Donovan's remedies. You know as well as I do that medicine isn't infallible, not even in your Boston or New York, Caldwell sighed. I'm not saying she deliberately harmed anyone, but there are spiritual consequences to certain practices. The town needs reassurance. What would reassure them? A good old-fashioned burning at the stake. That's unfair, Quinn. I've counseled restraint, but her continued presence will only inflame tensions. He lowered his voice. If you could convince her to move on for her own sake, it might be best for all concerned. I'll take it under advisement, Xander replied noncommittally, returning to collect his purchases. As he loaded the supplies onto his horse, Frank Miller and two other men approached. Miller's eyes were bloodshot, his grief evident in the slump of his shoulders. Quinn. His greeting was curt. Frank, sorry about your nephew. Miller acknowledged this with a short nod. Where is she? Safe. We want her gone from this valley permanently. Xander finished securing his supplies before responding. The law doesn't support running innocent people off their property. Innocent, Miller's voice rose. My sister's boy had a future before that witch gave him her medicine. Now we're putting him in the ground. Your nephew had mountain fever, Frank. Dr. Chambers from Denver said the same when he passed through. After she'd already poisoned him, Xander sighed. This isn't the way, Frank. You're hurting, I understand that, but blaming Dahlia won't bring your nephew back. Maybe not, Miller stepped closer, but it'll prevent her from harming others. You're harboring someone dangerous, Quinn. That makes you part of the problem. Is that a threat? Miller's companions shifted uncomfortably, but Frank held his ground. Take it how you want. But know this, if any harm comes to anyone else because of her, we'll hold you equally responsible. Xander mounted his horse. You do what you think is right, Frank, so will I. As he rode out of town, Xander realized the situation was worse than he'd anticipated. Grief had hardened into certainty, fear into righteous anger. Convincing the townspeople of Dahlia's innocence would be nearly impossible in the current climate. Returning to the cabin, he found Dahlia outside, examining his modest garden with a critical eye. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, revealing the clean lines of her profile against the mountain backdrop. Your soil needs better drainage, she said without preamble, and you're growing the wrong kind of beans for this elevation. Xander dismounted, amused despite the grim news he carried. Is that so? The Cherokee have a variety that would do better. She stopped, noticing his expression. What happened in town? Nothing unexpected. He began unloading the supplies. They're burying the Miller boy today. Feelings are running high. They blame me. Yes, Dahlia helped him carry packages inside. Did you speak with the sheriff? He can't offer much protection if you return to your father's house, not against the whole town. She set a sack of flour on the table with more force than necessary. So I'm to be exiled from my home because of ignorance and fear. For now, Xander agreed, until we can figure out something better. Her eyebrow arched. Mr. Quinn, you've already done more than enough. I won't have you making my problems yours. Too late for that, he replied simply. The moment I rode between you and that mob, I cast my lot. Besides, he added with a faint smile, apparently my garden needs help. Despite her protests, Dahlia's relief was evident. That evening, as they sorted through the supplies, she asked about his books, an eclectic collection ranging from Greek philosophy to modern scientific journals. Not what people expect from a frontier rancher, she observed. I wasn't always a rancher. Xander stoked the fire. I studied at Yale before the war, planned to become an engineer. What happened? History intervened. I enlisted, served 4 years, came back different, he shrugged. My family had moved west while I was gone. By the time I tracked them to Colorado, influenza had taken them. Found myself with nothing but their land claim and too many memories back east. Dahlia's expression softened. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Time doesn't always heal as completely as we'd like, she said, with the insight of someone who understood loss intimately. They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine over the next days. Dahlia proved herself useful, reorganizing Xander's haphazard household systems, improving his garden, and identifying medicinal plants on his property. She insisted on earning her keep, and he found himself appreciating her practical intelligence and quiet determination. 5 days after bringing her to the cabin, Xander woke to find Dahlia already dressed, a resolute expression on her face. I need to go to my father's house, she announced. There are medicines, books, things I can't replace. It's too risky, Xander objected. Give it more time. I've given it thought, she countered. Most of the town will be at church this morning. We could be in and out before services end. Xander recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. And if we're caught, then we face it together, she said. Unless you're reconsidering your position as my reluctant guardian, he couldn't help smiling at her challenge. I'll saddle the horses, doctor. Donovan's house stood at the edge of town, a modest 2-story structure with an attached office. Approaching cautiously, they detected no sign of watchers. The house appeared untouched, though a crude mark had been painted on the front door, a sign to ward off evil. Dahlia explained with bitter amusement. Inside, dust had settled over the furnishings. Dahlia moved efficiently, gathering crucial items, medical journals, her father's case of surgical instruments, personal mementos, and most importantly, his pharmacopoeia containing decades of medical observations. In the stillroom where medicines were prepared, she carefully packed dried herbs, tinctures, and compounds. My father corresponded with doctors across the country, she explained. Some of these formulations can't be found elsewhere. Xander kept watch through the windows, uncomfortable with every passing minute. When hoofbeats sounded outside, his hand moved to his revolver. Someone's coming, he warned. We need to go. Dahlia quickly secured the last bundle. They slipped out the back door just as voices approached the front of the house. Saw horses outside, a man was saying. Someone's here. They mounted quickly, taking a back trail that skirted the main road. They were nearly clear when 3 riders appeared ahead, blocking their path. Frank Miller sat at the center, rifle across his saddle. Stealing now, are we? He called. It's my property, Dahlia responded, her voice steady despite her pallor. Not anymore, Miller countered. Town council voted yesterday. Properties forfeit until investigation into your practices is complete. Xander moved his horse slightly forward. That's not legal, Frank, and you know it. What's legal is what the community decides out here, one of Miller's companions added, and we've decided she's not welcome. Step aside, Xander said quietly. No one needs to get hurt today. Miller's face hardened. Hand over what you've taken and you can go, Quinn. This isn't your fight. I'm making it mine. Xander's hand remained near his holster. Now move or don't, your choice. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Miller raised his rifle slightly. You're choosing the wrong side. I disagree. Xander didn't blink. And before you get any ideas about using that rifle, remember I was the best shot in the 4th Colorado. The standoff stretched. Finally, Miller lowered his weapon slightly. This isn't over. No, I expect it isn't. Xander nudged his horse forward, Dahlia following close behind. As they passed, Miller called after them. The curse will come for you too, Quinn, mark my words. They rode hard until they were safely away, slowing only when the town was well behind them. Dahlia's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her precious cargo. I'm sorry, she said. I've made you an outcast too. I was never exactly embraced by Wolf Creek society, Xander replied dryly. Don't concern yourself. But as they continued toward the cabin, he knew the situation had escalated. Miller wouldn't let this pass. They would need to be vigilant and perhaps consider options beyond simply waiting for tempers to cool. That night, as they organized Dahlia's salvaged belongings, the air between them had changed. Danger shared had created an intimacy neither had anticipated. Thank you, she said softly, as they finished storing her father's books. Few people would risk what you did today. Xander looked up, struck by the genuine warmth in her eyes. Anyone with sense would have done the same. No, she shook her head. They wouldn't, trust me, I know. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Xander cleared his throat and moved to stoke the fire. Miller won't let this rest, he said, changing the subject. We should consider our options. You mean I should leave, Dahlia corrected. Find somewhere new to start over. That's one possibility. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. I've spent my entire life in this valley. My father is buried here. Everything I know is here. I understand that better than most, Xander said quietly, but sometimes holding on to the past comes at too high a price, and sometimes running away does too. She met his gaze steadily. Would you leave if you were me? The question hung between them, honest and challenging. Xander considered his answer carefully. No, he admitted finally. I wouldn't, but I also wouldn't stand alone against an entire town blinded by fear. I'm not alone anymore, am I? There was a vulnerability in her question that touched something deep within him. No, he agreed. You're not. Later that night, unable to sleep, Xander sat on the cabin's small porch, watching clouds drift across the moon. The day's events played through his mind. Along with the unexpected ways, Dahlia Donovan was disrupting his carefully ordered existence. He'd spent years cultivating solitude, finding peace in the predictable rhythms of his isolated life. Now his home contained a woman considered dangerous by everyone in the nearest town, and he'd positioned himself as her protector against men he'd previously called neighbors. More disturbing was his growing awareness of her as more than just someone in need. He noticed the grace of her movements, the intelligence in her conversation, the quiet courage with which she faced adversity. Such observations led to thoughts a gentleman shouldn't entertain about a woman under his protection. His contemplation was interrupted by the cabin door opening. Dahlia emerged, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. Couldn't sleep, she asked, settling beside him on the rough-hewn bench, just thinking about how to be rid of me, about how quickly life can change course, he corrected. A week ago, my biggest concern was whether the south pasture would yield enough hay for winter. She smiled faintly. And now you're harboring a witch, a healer, he amended. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the night sounds of the mountains surrounding them, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of wind through pines. Tell me about your father, Xander said finally. Dahlia's expression softened with memory. He was brilliant, unconventional. After my mother died in childbirth, he raised me alone, taught me everything: reading, mathematics, medicine. He believed women's minds were equal to men's, that education shouldn't be limited by convention. Sounds progressive for a frontier doctor. He was. It's partly why we came west: fewer established rules, more freedom to practice medicine his way. She gazed up at the stars. He incorporated treatments from many traditions. Native remedies, Chinese methods he learned in California, European techniques from his training. He believed healing was universal, transcending culture, which made some people uncomfortable. Yes, she sighed. But he helped many who wouldn't admit it now. Set broken bones, delivered babies, treated fevers. The same people who call me cursed once praised his skill. Human memory is conveniently short, Xander observed. What about your family? She asked. You mentioned losing them to influenza. My father was a banker who came west for opportunity. Mother was a schoolteacher. They had grand plans for developing this valley. His voice softened with remembrance. I had 2 younger brothers. They would have been 19 and 21 now. I'm sorry, Dahlia said gently. It's a particular kind of loneliness being the last of your line. Yes. He hadn't articulated that feeling before, but she'd captured it perfectly. It is. They fell silent again, but it was a silence of shared understanding rather than awkwardness. When Dahlia finally rose to return inside, her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, a small gesture of comfort that lingered in his awareness long after she'd gone. The next day brought rain, a steady, soaking downpour that confined them to the cabin. Dahlia used the time to organize her medical supplies and begin copying essential information from her father's journals into a smaller book she could carry easily. Just in case, she explained when Xander questioned the task. I won't be caught unprepared again. As she worked, she shared her knowledge, freely explaining the properties of various plants, methods of preparation, diagnostic techniques. Xander found himself genuinely interested, asking questions that revealed his scientific education. You know more than you let on, Dahlia observed during a discussion of circulation and blood pressure. Yale wasn't completely wasted on me, he replied with a smile. Why did you never return to your studies after the war? His expression clouded slightly. The man who left for war wasn't the one who returned. Some doors close permanently. She seemed about to press further but recognized his reluctance. Instead, she offered a different kind of opening. Would you be willing to learn some basic medical skills? Out here, with proper care so distant, it could make the difference in an emergency. I'd be a poor student, he warned. I doubt that very much, Mr. Quinn. The day passed in unexpected camaraderie, the rain creating a cocoon around the cabin that excluded the outside world and its judgment. By evening, Xander found himself observing Dahlia with growing admiration, not just for her beauty, which was considerable, but for her resilience, intelligence, and the passionate conviction with which she approached her calling. Such thoughts were dangerous, he reminded himself. Her situation remained precarious, her future uncertain. Developing feelings beyond protective concern would only complicate matters. Yet when she looked up from her work, catching him watching her, the smile that curved her lips stirred something he'd thought long dormant. 3 days later, Sheriff Hayes rode up to the cabin, alone and unannounced. Xander met him outside, his stance deliberately casual though his senses were alert. Sheriff, what brings you out this way? Hayes dismounted, looking uncomfortable. Official business, I'm afraid. Is Miss Donovan here? She is. I need to speak with both of you. Xander led him inside, where Dahlia was preparing a midday meal. She straightened at the sheriff's entrance, her expression guarded. Sheriff Hayes. Hayes removed his hat. Miss Donovan, I wish this was a social call. What's happened? Xander asked. Judge Holloway arrived yesterday from Denver. Hayes shifted his weight. Frank Miller has filed formal charges, negligent homicide in his nephew's death. He's got 5 witnesses willing to testify the boy worsened after taking your remedies. Dahlia paled but kept her composure. That's impossible. Timothy improved initially. He only relapsed when his mother stopped the treatment, believing Reverend Caldwell's prayers would be more effective. I believe you, Hayes said, surprising them both. But Judge Holloway is traditional in his views. And with the community sentiment as it is, he trailed off. When is the hearing? Xander asked. 2 days from now. I've been instructed to bring Miss Donovan in. The sheriff looked genuinely regretful. I can delay until tomorrow morning, but that's all. And if I don't appear? Dahlia asked quietly. Hayes met her eyes directly. Then the judge will likely issue a warrant for your arrest, and mine will not be the only badge looking for you. After the sheriff departed, Dahlia moved methodically around the cabin, gathering her most essential belongings. What are you doing? Xander asked, though the answer was obvious. I can't stay. Her voice was steady, her movements purposeful. I won't let you be caught harboring a fugitive. You haven't been convicted of anything yet. We both know how this will end. She paused in her packing. A woman alone, practicing medicine without formal training, using methods they don't understand against the word of 5 respected community members. Even with a fair judge, my chances would be slim. So you'll run. Where? West, California perhaps, or north to Wyoming territory. She resumed packing. I have some money saved, enough to make a start somewhere. Xander watched her, conflict evident in his expression. There's another option. She looked up. Fight, tell your side, make them hear you. With what evidence? My father's journals. They'll be dismissed as more witchcraft. Then I'll testify to your character. And be ostracized alongside me. No, she shook her head firmly. You've done enough, Xander, more than anyone could expect. He stepped closer, taking the bundle from her hands and setting it aside. Listen to me. Running confirms their suspicions. Staying facing these charges with dignity and truth might not change the outcome immediately, but it plants seeds of doubt in their certainty. That's a lovely sentiment, but I know something about running, he interrupted. After the war, I ran from everything: memories, responsibilities, connections. It doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the reckoning. Dahlia studied his face, seeing the conviction there. Why do you care so much what happens to me? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Xander found himself at a crossroads: maintain the safe distance he'd cultivated for years, or acknowledge the truth that had been growing more evident daily. Because in 1 week, you've shown more courage and principle than most people demonstrate in a lifetime, he said finally. Because you deserve justice, not exile, and because, he hesitated, then committed. Because I've come to care for you in ways I didn't expect. Her eyes widened slightly, a flush coloring her cheeks. Xander, you don't need to respond to that, he said quickly. It changes nothing about your situation. I'm just asking you to consider fighting rather than fleeing. After a moment, she nodded slowly. I'll think about it tonight, but I'll need your help preparing my defense if I decide to stay. You have it, he promised, whatever you decide. They spent the evening reviewing her father's detailed records of Timothy Miller's treatment, identifying potential witnesses who might speak favorably, and crafting arguments against the superstition that clouded the case. As midnight approached, Dahlia finally set down her pen. I'll stay, she announced quietly. You're right, running solves nothing. Relief washed over Xander's features. We'll face this together. There's something else I need to tell you, she said, her expression serious. Something I should have mentioned earlier. What is it? The night Timothy died, I wasn't the only one treating him. Martha Miller sent for Reverend Caldwell when the boy's fever spiked. He administered a purifying tonic he'd brought back from his missionary work in Africa. Her eyes held Xander's steadily. I warned them it could interact dangerously with the medicine I'd given, but they wouldn't listen. 2 hours later, the boy was dead. Why didn't you tell the sheriff this? Who would believe me over a man of God? It would look like I was trying to shift blame. Xander considered this new information. Do you have any proof? Only my observations of the symptoms that followed. The rapid heart rate, the blue tinge to his lips consistent with foxglove poisoning, which I suspect was in Caldwell's tonic. So Caldwell's cure may have killed the boy, Xander mused. Not your medicine, I believe so, but proving it. She shrugged helplessly. This changes our approach, Xander said, pacing the small room. If we can establish reasonable doubt about the cause of death, perhaps suggest an examination of Caldwell's tonic. He'll never allow it. And without the original compound, we can't prove anything. Then we need to focus on your reputation. Find others you've treated successfully who will speak for you. They worked late into the night, formulating their strategy. When exhaustion finally overtook them, Dahlia retired to the bed while Xander made his customary place by the fire. Sleep, however, proved elusive for both. Xander. Dahlia's voice came softly through the darkness. Yes, what you said earlier about caring for me. She hesitated. I've come to care for you too, more than I should, given our circumstances. His heart quickened at her words. Dahlia, no, let me finish. Her voice gained strength. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you has been unexpected, in the best way. You saw me when others looked past. You defended me when others accused. Those aren't small things. In the dim light of the dying fire, he could just make out her silhouette as she sat up in bed. In another life with different circumstances. She continued, "Perhaps we still can," he said. "Once this is resolved." "You're an optimist, Mr. Quinn," she replied, with a sad smile he could hear rather than see. "I never would have guessed." Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the reality of their situation. They rode into town side by side, presenting a united front as curious eyes tracked their progress toward the courthouse, a generous term for the converted storefront where Judge Holloway held court during his circuit visits. Inside, the room was packed with townspeople. Frank Miller sat in the front row, his grief hardened into righteous anger. Beside him, Martha Miller dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Reverend Caldwell occupied a place of prominence, his expression solemn. Judge Holloway, a stern man with steel gray hair and piercing eyes, called the proceedings to order. The charges were read: negligent homicide through the administration of harmful substances disguised as medicine. When asked how she pleaded, Dahlia stood straight, her voice clear. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecution presented its case first. Frank Miller testified about his nephew's decline after taking Dahlia's witch's brew. Martha followed, describing how the boy had convulsed and turned blue shortly before death symptoms she attributed to evil influences. 3 other witnesses corroborated parts of their account, though under Xander's questioning, admitted they hadn't actually seen Dahlia administer any treatment. When Reverend Caldwell took the stand, Xander approached his cross-examination carefully. "Reverend, were you present during the boy's final hours?" "I was called to provide spiritual comfort," Caldwell confirmed. "And did you provide any physical treatments as well?" Caldwell hesitated almost imperceptibly. "I administered a blessed tonic to ease his suffering." "This tonic, where did you obtain it?" "I brought the formula back from my missionary work. It's a traditional remedy, blessed by prayer." "Did you know its ingredients?" "The precise formulation is complex, but it contains various plant extracts known for their purifying properties." Xander pressed further. "Did you know if these extracts might interact with Miss Donovan's treatments?" Caldwell glanced toward Frank Miller. "I wouldn't presume to understand the workings of her methods." "So you introduced an unknown substance without considering potential interactions." "Objection," Miller shouted, rising from his seat. "He's trying to blame a man of God for the witch's doing." Judge Holloway banged his gavel. "Mr. Miller, you will refrain from outbursts. However," he turned to Xander, "I fail to see the relevance of this line of questioning. The charges concern Miss Donovan's actions. Your Honor, I'm establishing that multiple treatments were administered and that the timing of symptoms corresponds with the Reverend's tonic, not Miss Donovan's medicine." Murmurs swept the courtroom. Holloway frowned. "Proceed, but tread carefully, Mr. Quinn." By the time Dahlia took the stand, tension in the courtroom was palpable. She testified with quiet dignity about her training under her father, the careful records she kept, and the specific treatment she'd provided Timothy: a mild febrifuge containing willow bark, elderberry, and honey. "These ingredients have been used safely for generations," she explained. "They reduce fever and support the body's natural healing." "And the boy improved initially?" Xander asked. "Yes. His fever reduced significantly the first day. It was only when treatment was interrupted, and later when Reverend Caldwell's tonic was administered, that his condition deteriorated rapidly." "Lies," Martha Miller shouted. "My boy was dying from the moment she touched him." Judge Holloway called for order. As the room quieted, he addressed Dahlia directly. "Miss Donovan, do you possess any formal medical training or certification?" "No, Your Honor, but my father. Was your father certified by any medical college or institution?" "He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1842. "And did he formally train you, with documentation that would be recognized by the Colorado Medical Society?" Dahlia hesitated. "No, Your Honor." "So you admit to practicing medicine without proper qualification?" "I admit to using knowledge passed down through generations to help those in need when no qualified doctor was available within 50 miles, she replied evenly. Her answer seemed to catch the judge off guard. He studied her for a moment before continuing. "The law is clear on this matter. Practicing medicine without certification is itself an offense, regardless of intent or outcome. If I may, Your Honor, Xander interjected. The nearest certified physician is in Denver, a journey of several days. In frontier communities like Wolf Creek, informal practitioners fill a vital need. To criminalize such care would leave many without any medical assistance at all. Holloway considered this a practical concern but not a legal defense. As the day progressed, Xander called several witnesses who testified to Dahlia's healing skills: a rancher whose broken leg she had set, a miner's wife whose difficult childbirth she had managed successfully, a child who had recovered from pneumonia under her care. By late afternoon, Judge Holloway called a recess, announcing he would render his verdict the following morning. As the courtroom emptied, Xander and Dahlia remained seated, aware of the hostile glances directed their way. "You did well," Xander said quietly. "It won't be enough," she replied. "Did you see his face when I admitted to lacking certification? We've planted doubts about Caldwell's role, and the testimonials were strong." Sheriff Hayes approached them as the room cleared. "I can escort you out the back way, crowds getting restless out front." They accepted his offer, slipping out through a rear entrance and mounting their horses quickly. As they rode out of town, Xander noticed Dahlia's hands trembling slightly on her reins. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we face them with truth and dignity. That matters." She managed a wan smile. "It does. Thank you for that gift, at least." Back at the cabin, they ate a simple meal in subdued silence, each lost in thoughts of what the morning might bring. As darkness fell, Dahlia stepped outside onto the porch. Xander followed, finding her gazing at the stars. "My father used to say that looking at the stars puts human problems in perspective," she said without turning. "Those lights have burned for thousands of years before us and will continue long after we're gone." "Comforting thought," Xander replied, moving to stand beside her. "Is it? Sometimes I find it terrifying how small and temporary we are." She wrapped her arms around herself against the night chill. "All our struggles, our hopes, our fears, mere moments in cosmic time." Xander considered this. "Perhaps what gives meaning to those moments is how we use them, the connections we make, the good we do, however fleeting." "Philosophy, Mr. Quinn," she smiled faintly. "Another hidden depth." "I have many," he replied, returning her smile. Then more seriously, "Dahlia, regardless of tomorrow's verdict, I want you to know something." She turned to face him fully, her features softened by moonlight. "These past days have awakened something in me I thought was lost," he continued. "A belief that life can offer more than mere survival. That connection, real connection, is still possible, even for someone as damaged as I believed myself to be." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Xander, you're not cursed," he said firmly. "If anything, you've been a blessing to this community, whether they recognize it or not, and certainly to me." The space between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. When Dahlia finally moved, it was to close that distance, her hand reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. "In all my life," she whispered, "no one has defended me as you have. No one has seen me so clearly." Xander covered her hand with his own. "I see a remarkable woman of courage and compassion, someone worth fighting for." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, a natural culmination of the connection that had been building between them. Gentle at first, it deepened with shared emotion and understanding. When they finally parted, Dahlia rested her forehead against his chest, his arms encircling her protectively. "Whatever comes tomorrow," she murmured, "this moment was worth it." They remained on the porch until the night air grew too cold, then returned inside, their relationship irrevocably altered. That night, for the first time, Xander didn't sleep by the fire but joined Dahlia in the small bed, holding her as they both sought comfort against the uncertainty of dawn. Morning brought heavy clouds and the promise of rain, a fitting backdrop for the somber mood as they prepared to return to town. They spoke little, each preparing mentally for what might be their last day together, depending on the judge's verdict. The courtroom was even more crowded than before, word having spread about the unusual case. Judge Holloway entered, his expression giving nothing away as he took his seat and called the court to order. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he began, and taking into account the unique circumstances of frontier medicine, I have reached my decision." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the judge. "On the charge of negligent homicide, I find insufficient evidence to convict. The prosecution has not proven beyond reasonable doubt that Miss Donovan's treatments directly caused Timothy Miller's death." A collective gasp moved through the room. Frank Miller's face darkened with anger while Martha began to sob quietly. "However," Holloway continued, raising his voice over the murmurs, "on the matter of practicing medicine without proper certification, the law is clear. Miss Donovan has admitted to providing medical care without the qualifications required by Colorado territorial statutes." Dahlia tensed beside Xander, her hand finding his beneath the table. "The usual penalty for such an offense is a fine of $50 and a prohibition against further practice." Holloway paused, studying Dahlia over his spectacles. "However, given the remote nature of this community and the testimony regarding Miss Donovan's positive contributions, I am willing to consider an alternative." The room hushed again, all attention focused on the judge's next words. "Miss Donovan, if you agree to apprentice formally with a certified physician for a period of no less than 1 year, and subsequently obtain proper certification through examination, the fine will be waived, and you may continue limited practice under supervision until fully qualified." "Do you find these terms acceptable?" Dahlia stood, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "Yes, Your Honor. I would welcome the opportunity for formal training." "Very well. Dr. James Wilson in Denver has agreed to take on an apprentice. You will report to him within 2 weeks to begin your studies." Holloway banged his gavel. "This court is adjourned." The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some townspeople nodded with grudging approval at what seemed a fair compromise. Others, including the Millers, stormed out in evident dissatisfaction. Reverend Caldwell lingered, his expression troubled as he watched Dahlia and Xander. Sheriff Hayes approached them as the crowd dispersed. "That's about the best outcome you could have hoped for," he said quietly. "It's more than fair," Dahlia agreed, still looking somewhat stunned, "though I never expected." "Judge Holloway is strict but not unreasonable," Hayes explained. "And he has a daughter studying medicine back east, probably sympathetic to your situation." As they prepared to leave, Reverend Caldwell intercepted them at the door. "Miss Donovan," he began awkwardly, I believe I owe you an apology." Xander tensed, but Dahlia placed a restraining hand on his arm. "For what, specifically, Reverend?" she asked, her tone neutral. Caldwell glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I've been reflecting on Timothy's final hours. The tonic I administered, its effects were not what I expected. I never considered it might interact harmfully with your treatment." "The boy might have died anyway," Dahlia said gently. "Mountain fever is often fatal, even with the best care." "Perhaps, but my arrogance may have hastened his passing." Caldwell looked genuinely troubled. "I will live with that uncertainty." "As will I," Dahlia replied. "Perhaps we can both learn from this tragedy." The Reverend nodded slowly. "I wish you well in your studies, Miss Donovan. Denver will be enlightening." As they rode back to the cabin, the implications of the verdict began to sink in. Dahlia would be leaving for Denver, a city over 100 miles away, within 2 weeks. Her path was set toward formal medical training, a dream she'd never thought possible. "A year in Denver," Xander mused as they unsaddled the horses. "It's a good opportunity." "It is," she agreed, "though not what I expected." They moved inside, the familiar space now charged with a new awareness of impending separation. Xander built up the fire while Dahlia prepared coffee, domestic actions that had become comfortable routines. "What will you do?" she finally asked. "While I'm in Denver." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. What would become of their newfound connection? What future, if any, could they envision? "That depends," he answered carefully. "On what you want." Dahlia set down the coffee pot, turning to face him fully. "What I want. I want not to leave just when I've found someone worth staying for. I want not to choose between my calling and—" She hesitated, and, he prompted gently. "And the man I've come to love," she finished, the words both vulnerable and certain. Xander crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Then perhaps we don't have to choose. What do you mean? Denver isn't the end of the world, it's a few days' ride. I could visit, often. His thumbs traced circles on her palms, and when your apprenticeship ends, we could decide together what comes next. Hope bloomed in her expression. You would wait. A year is a long time. For the right person, it's nothing, he smiled, drawing her closer. Besides, my ranch has been neglected while I played lawyer. I have work to do, improvements to make, perhaps build a proper house. A house? Her eyebrow arched questioningly. Something suitable for a doctor's practice, and perhaps a family. He studied her reaction carefully. If that's something you might want, someday. Tears welled in Dahlia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. Xander Quinn, are you making plans for us? I'm considering possibilities, he replied, his own smile growing. With the remarkable woman who reminded me that life offers second chances, if she's willing. Her answer came not in words, but in the way she rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a kiss full of promise and newfound hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a bittersweet flurry of preparation. Dahlia organized her father's medical journals and equipment for transport to Denver. Xander helped her reclaim essential items from her father's house, a process made easier by the judge's verdict, which had somewhat dampened the town's hostility. They also made time for quieter moments, walks through the autumn-touched forest, evenings reading aloud by the fire, nights of tender discovery as their relationship deepened. Both were acutely aware of the approaching separation, making each moment together more precious. The day before Dahlia's departure, Xander took her to a special place, a high meadow overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the season's change. My father brought us here when we first arrived, he explained as they spread a blanket on the grass. He said a man should always know the full extent of what he's working for, be able to see it all at once, sometimes. Dahlia surveyed the spectacular Vista Mountains rising majestically in the distance, the glint of Wolf Creek winding through forests and clearings, Xander's property visible as a patch of cultivated land amid wilderness. It's beautiful, she said softly. It is. He reached for her hand. And it will be here waiting when you return. She turned to him, reading the deeper meaning in his words. As will you, always. He drew her close. I have something for you. From his pocket, he produced a small object, a silver locket on a delicate chain. Opening it revealed a tiny daguerreotype of the two of them, taken in Denver during a supply run the previous week. So you won't forget what you're coming back to, he said as he fastened it around her neck. Dahlia touched the locket, eyes bright with emotion. As if I could forget. They remained in the meadow until sunset painted the sky in spectacular hues of gold and crimson, talking of plans and possibilities, of the future they hoped to build together once her training was complete. The journey to Denver was long but uneventful. Xander insisted on accompanying her, wanting to meet Dr. Wilson himself and ensure her comfortable settlement. The city was larger and busier than Dahlia remembered from her few previous visits, the streets crowded with traders, miners, and the growing population drawn by Colorado's opportunities. Dr. Wilson proved to be a kindly man in his 60s with progressive views on women in medicine. He had corresponded with Dahlia's father years earlier and remembered him with respect. Your father was ahead of his time, he told Dahlia as he showed them his well-appointed clinic. Incorporating indigenous knowledge into scientific practice, precisely what medicine needs. I'm pleased to continue his work through you. Living arrangements were made with a respectable widow who rented rooms to female students and professionals. Mrs. Harrington's boarding house was clean, comfortable, and conveniently located near the clinic. Their parting, when it came, was private, a moment stolen in the small garden behind the boarding house. 1 year, Xander said, holding her close. It will pass before we know it. I'll write every week, Dahlia promised, and I'll visit when I can. Denver has many supplies a growing ranch needs, he added with a smile. Their final kiss was a promise of patience, of commitment, of a future worth waiting for. True to his word, Xander made the journey to Denver every few months. Each visit confirmed what they already knew, that their connection was not a fleeting response to unusual circumstances, but something deeper and more enduring. Dahlia flourished under Dr. Wilson's tutelage. Her natural aptitude for medicine, combined with the practical experience she'd gained working with her father, made her an exceptional student. By the 6th month, she was assisting with surgeries and managing certain cases independently under supervision. Her letters described her progress, the fascinating new techniques she was learning, and the gradual acceptance she was earning from Denver's medical community. But they also spoke of loneliness, of missing the mountains, of dreams deferred but not abandoned. Xander's replies told of improvements to the ranch, of a new house taking shape, of plans for expanding his operation. Between the lines was always the same message he was building for two, creating a place for their shared future. Winter came and went. Spring brought renewal, and the knowledge that their separation was more than half completed. Summer found Dahlia excelling in her studies, earning Dr. Wilson's highest praise and the respect of patients who initially doubted a woman's capabilities. In Wolf Creek, attitudes were slowly shifting as well. The successful treatment of several difficult cases by Dr. Wilson, based on formulations from Dr. Donovan's journals that Dahlia had shared, began to rehabilitate her reputation. Even Frank Miller, when his youngest daughter fell ill with a fever similar to the one that took his nephew, reluctantly allowed treatments based on Dahlia's protocol administered by the town's barber, who had taken on basic medical duties in her absence. The girl recovered fully, and while Miller never publicly acknowledged Dahlia's contribution, he ceased his active campaign against her. In early autumn, nearly 10 months into her apprenticeship, Dahlia received unexpected news. Dr. Wilson, impressed by her exceptional progress, declared her ready for examination ahead of schedule. "You've accomplished in 10 months what most apprentices require 2 years to master," he told her. "I've arranged for you to sit for certification next month." Her letter bearing this news reached Xander as he was putting final touches on the new house, a spacious 2-story structure with a dedicated wing designed as a medical office and dispensary. His response was immediate. He would come to Denver for the examination and, if all went well, bring her home afterward if she was ready, if that was still what she wanted. Her reply left no doubt. "Nothing would make me happier than to return with you to begin the life we've been planning, the future we've earned." The certification examination, conducted by a panel of 3 physicians from the Colorado Medical Society, was rigorous testing Dahlia's knowledge of anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and practical treatment. For 2 days, she demonstrated both theoretical understanding and clinical skills, drawing on everything she'd learned from her father, from Dr. Wilson, and from her own experiences. When it was over, the lead examiner, a stern man who had initially regarded her with obvious skepticism, offered a rare smile. "Miss Donovan, it is my pleasure to inform you that you have passed with distinction. Your certification will be processed immediately." Xander, waiting outside the examination room, caught her as she emerged, lifting her in a jubilant embrace that drew amused glances from passing medical personnel. "Dr. Donovan, I presume?" he said when he finally set her down. "It appears so," she replied, eyes shining with triumph and joy. They celebrated that evening with Dr. Wilson and several colleagues who had supported Dahlia's unusual path to certification. Plans were discussed for her return to Wolf Creek, the first properly certified physician the town would have in permanent residence. "You'll face challenges, Doctor." Wilson cautioned, "Old prejudices die hard, but you have the knowledge, the skill, and the temperament to overcome them." "And she won't face them alone," Xander added, his hand finding hers beneath the table. Their journey back to Wolf Creek took them through golden aspen groves and pine forests touched with the first frost of autumn. As they crested the final ridge, the valley spread below them home, in all its rugged beauty. Dahlia reined in her horse, taking in the view. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered. Wait until you see the house," Xander said with quiet pride. "If it meets your approval." It did. The new structure stood on higher ground than the original cabin, which remained as a guest house, its wide porch offering views across the valley. Inside, Xander had combined frontier practicality with unexpected comforts, larger windows than was common, built-in bookshelves, a spacious kitchen, and the carefully designed medical wing with its separate entrance for patients. "You thought of everything," Dahlia marveled as he showed her through the rooms. "I had time to plan," he replied, watching her reaction with pleasure, and motivation to get it right. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Xander took her hand. "There's one more thing I need to show you," he said, leading her to a small garden behind the house. There, protected by a low stone wall, grew an array of medicinal plants, many transplanted from her father's garden, others new varieties she'd mentioned in her letters from Denver. Xander. Her voice caught as she recognized her father's careful arrangements replicated in this new space. "Your father's legacy continued," he said softly, "and the beginning of ours." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Dahlia Donovan, when I found you surrounded by that mob, I never imagined how completely you would change my life. You brought purpose back to a man who was merely existing. You reminded me that connection, real connection, is worth any risk." From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. "I'm asking you to take one more risk, to build a life with me, to combine your calling with mine, to face whatever comes together." Tears spilled down Dahlia's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it held all the certainty of a woman who had faced her worst fears and emerged stronger. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony attended by Dr. Wilson, who had traveled from Denver for the occasion, Sheriff Hayes, and a few others who had supported them through difficult times. Reverend Caldwell, in a gesture of reconciliation, offered to officiate, acknowledging publicly that he had misjudged Dahlia and asking the community's forgiveness for his role in past events. Word had spread about Dr. Donovan's return, now fully certified and married to Xander Quinn. Within days of opening her practice, patients began to arrive cautiously at first, then in increasing numbers as successful treatments built confidence. Even Martha Miller eventually came, bringing her youngest with a persistent cough that local remedies hadn't touched. She offered no apology for past accusations, but her presence itself was acknowledgement of Dahlia's legitimacy. Frank Miller held out longest, but when a mining accident left his foreman with a compound fracture that threatened amputation, he too swallowed his pride and sought Dahlia's help. Her skilled setting of the bone, combined with careful wound management, saved both the man's leg and his livelihood. "You didn't have to help after how I treated you," Miller said gruffly as he paid her fee. "Yes, I did," Dahlia replied simply. "It's my calling." Over the following year, the Quinns established themselves as pillars of the community Xander's expanding ranch, providing employment and stability. Dahlia's practice bringing modern medical care to a region that had lacked it. The curse that townspeople had once feared proved instead to be a blessing, as Dahlia's knowledge saved lives and improved health throughout the valley. In the spring of their second year of marriage, as wildflowers bloomed across the meadows, Dahlia shared news of her own they would be welcoming a child by winter's first snow. Xander's joy was boundless. His protective instincts immediately engaged despite Dahlia's amused assurances that pregnancy was natural, not an illness. Their son, James Donovan Quinn, arrived on a clear December night in 1881, attended by Dr. Wilson, who had made the journey from Denver especially for the occasion. Named for Dahlia's father and Xander's youngest brother, he was a healthy, robust child with his mother's emerald eyes and his father's determined chin. "He'll be the best of both of us," Xander predicted as he held his son for the first time. "And something uniquely himself as well," Dahlia added with a tired smile. As James grew, so did their endeavors. The ranch prospered, allowing Xander to employ several local men and contribute substantially to the town's economy. Dahlia's practice expanded to include regular circuits to outlying settlements and ranches, bringing medical care to those too distant or too poor to travel. They welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years after James, and another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. Their home became known for its warmth and hospitality, their partnership an example of mutual respect and shared purpose. On the 5th anniversary of Dahlia's return from Denver, they hosted a gathering for friends and neighbors. The celebration spilled from house to garden, children playing among the medicinal herbs that now grew in abundant profusion. As evening approached, Xander found Dahlia standing in the same meadow where he'd given her the locket years earlier. The valley spread before them, touched with the golden light of late afternoon. "Penny for your thoughts, Dr. Quinn," he said, coming to stand beside her. She smiled at the name. She practiced medicine as Dr. Donovan, but had taken his surname in their personal life. "I was thinking about curses and blessings, how impossible it is sometimes to tell one from the other in the moment." Xander nodded, understanding immediately. "What seemed to curse the mob, the accusations led you to Denver to certification. And to you," she added, leaning against him, "the man who saw a woman in peril, not a witch, who found the blessing everyone else missed." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. "I'd say we both found blessings that day." Below them, their children's laughter rose from the garden where friends gathered around tables laden with food. The new church bell donated by the Quinns rang out across the valley, calling people to the evening service. In the distance, lights began to appear in Wolf Creek as dusk settled over the mountains. "We've built something good here," Dahlia said softly. "Something that matters." "We have," Xander agreed, "and we're just beginning." Hand in hand, they walked back down the hill toward the home. They'd created a sanctuary of healing and hope in a land that had once been defined by hardship and suspicion. The path that had started with a desperate rescue had led them to a shared life. Neither could have imagined that turbulent morning by Wolf Creek. What others had called a curse had indeed become their greatest blessing.